I want you to understand something because I think we have a misconception about what we should do with brokenness. Oftentimes we believe that the goal to life is to be unbroken. To be unbroken. I hope that you're beginning to understand that that's not the goal. The goal is to surrender our brokenness to God so that He can restore and recreate and reconcile us in our brokenness. I'd like for you to turn in your Bibles to Luke chapter 15 and turn to verse 22. Luke chapter 15, verse 22, as we continue our series entitled Broken. Now, if you remember, in this series, we've been talking about this concept or this idea of being broken. And we've offered some definitions. I want to remind you of those definitions because I think they're important. That's why I repeat them. But the first definition of broken is to have something merely missing, i.e. a toy car. If you have a toy car, your toy car is supposed to have 4 wheels. And if it's missing a wheel, it's broken. And why? Because it's missing something. Another way to define brokenness is that of a relationship that has been separated or broken, aka broken relationship. And then the last way we've defined broken is something that's just completely broken or completely destroyed. And we stand that one apart from the other two in this sense. It's like if something that has value when it's unbroken and falls on the floor, let's say a vase, it falls on the floor and is shattered, then it's not valuable anymore because of the brokenness. And in this series, I hope you're beginning to get that this idea of broken is a worldly definition. It's a worldly way of defining something because in God's economy, that which is broken does not lose its value. And I've had this picture up here every Sunday in this sermon of a vase, and in one side there's a pile of broken vase pieces. But then there's another vase that shows what God can do, and this is an example of a art that people more creative and more tedious than me can take a broken vase or something that's broken and repair it with gold, and then in which case it becomes more valuable. And that's a greater reflection of what God does with the broken in our world. And friends, that's a reflection of what God can do with us in our lives if we would allow Him to come in our lives. And we've been talking about our brokenness. We've discovered that we're all broken, and I hope that you're beginning to see that complete brokenness oftentimes is an opportunity for God to reveal His immense grace and goodness for us. I want you to understand something because I think we have a misconception about what we should do with brokenness. Oftentimes we believe that the goal to life is to be unbroken. To be unbroken. I hope that you're beginning to understand that that's not the goal. The goal is to surrender our brokenness to God so that He can restore and recreate and reconcile us in our brokenness. Last week we talked about a son who made some choices. Oftentimes he's referred to as the prodigal son or simply the younger son or the lost son. He made some choices that led to complete brokenness in his life. And we saw in that story that he came to his senses and returned to his father. And in the act of returning to his father, he was restored back into relationship with his father. And today I want to talk a little bit more about this and not necessarily focus on the younger son, but see, that story of the prodigal son, it begins with there was a man who had two sons. Oftentimes we focus on the younger son and we don't pay much attention to the older son. But today we're going to look specifically at the older son that this father had. We could assume that maybe the older son had his act together, but by the world's economy, he did. But within God's economy, as Jesus is teaching, we see that he went away completely broken, in need of a change of heart, or in need to come to his senses, because we see the older brother didn't necessarily have a sin problem in the sense of everybody saw the mistakes he made, but we see that he had a heart problem. So today what I want to talk about, and the title of today's message is simply a matter of the heart, a matter of the heart. And I want you to get this. Sometimes we can have a hardened heart or a heart problem towards the complete broken. Those who are completely broken, and as a result, our heart becomes hardened. And in a hardened heart, if we have a hardened heart towards others, we are likely to also have a hardened heart towards God. I have a friend that I've known for a long time, long before I was in ministry. I met him when I was working at Les Schwab Tires. And when I met him, he was a small business owner and worked every day and supported himself quite effectively. But due to some circumstances that are probably some of his choices, but perhaps just the system we live in that sometimes is inadequate, he now lives on the street. Uh-oh. Hopefully it's not your car. No, just kidding. Anyway, let's keep going. And he lives on the street in a camper. Okay? He moved on the street here this summer. Stuff was just not adding up for him. His income basis, his bills were not adding up. And so he moved onto the street. And not long after he moved on the street, he was in his camper, or at his camper, and some people drove by. Some people with hardened hearts drove by and decided it would be a good idea to throw eggs at him, which is crazy because eggs are expensive, right? Unless you have chickens, and it's not too bad. But threw eggs at him and screamed out the window, "Get a job, you bum!" Okay, this man is 72 years old. He's a disabled veteran, drawing disability for what happened to him when he was in the military. He's worked his whole life as a cowboy and a farmhand. But see, they didn't know his story. They just saw him, thought he was less value than them, and decided it'd be a good idea to throw eggs. I tell you this story not to make you mad. It did kind of make me angry when I heard about it. But to point something out, when people do that, they don't reflect Jesus. They don't reflect any kind of true values other than they reflect a hardened heart. I also to tell you this story so I can confess to you that I'm guilty of hardening my heart towards people who are in a difficult situation, just like the young people that were throwing the eggs at my friend. Perhaps rather than seeing someone who's perhaps in a difficult situation, I have a tendency to not see them as an equal in the eyes of the Lord, but to see them as less than me, or to look down upon them, to lessen their value. This reveals a heart issue, and I realize that while I've had a pretty good life, that I too am broken. that I too have hardness in my heart and brokenness in my soul that God needs to restore and do his his amazing work. You see, because this reveals something, and I hope you get this from this section of scripture from last week and this week, is that there's two types of broken people in this world. Those whose brokenness is obvious. It's seen on the outside, right? We encounter people like that, just their circumstances just highlight their brokenness. But then there are those who have been able to manage their brokenness and hide it, and they appear to have it all together, but they're still broken. In today's text, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the older son and examine his hardened heart and see his need for an awakening, and hopefully we can learn from him as we've learned from the younger son, as Jesus teaches this parable. So I just want to set this up a little bit. We're going to Luke chapter 15. We're going to start with verse 22, but I want to kind of give you the context in case you weren't here last week. And this is the beginning of the story tells of a younger son. It starts out by saying there was a man who had two sons. And the younger son went to the father and said, "Give me my inheritance now," which is kind of an unkind thing if you think about it, because he's like, "Dad, I wish you were dead already so that I could take my inheritance and just do what I want." And so his father agreed and gave him his inheritance, and he took everything he had and he went to a distant land and squandered everything he had on wild living, whatever that is. And a famine came on the land, and he found himself feeding pigs, longing to eat the food that the pigs were eating, which revealed the depth of rock bottom that he had hit. And in that time, it says he came to his senses, and he said, "I will return to my father, because even my father's servants are treated better than I'm being treated now." And so he went to his father and he said, "Father, I'm not worthy to be called your son, for I have sinned against you and I've sinned against God. Please make me one of your servants." And the father had a response. And we're going to read the response. So we're going to pick up right there in the text with verse 22, and this is what it says. "But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandal on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him, 'What's going on?' 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So the father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fatted calf.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'" I want to talk about the older brother a little bit because there's some things I want to point out about him. And the first thing is very obvious. The older brother had a hard heart. There was a problem with his heart, and his heart was hardened. And listen to what it says. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. Think about this. I want you to think about this. You're home with your family, and you have a sibling that has been wayward, and that sibling comes back and apologizes for all of their mistakes. Your parents are excited, but you become angry. You get that? The older brother became angry and refused to join in the celebration with his father. You see, a broken person, a person who has a hardened heart, who is broken but is able to kind of manage it and hold it, will bemoan someone else's blessing. Will be jealous about something good happening in someone else's life. A broken person often feels the absence of God in their soul and hates when someone else experiences God. I just have a question. I had this encounter a number of years ago when I was first kind of getting involved in the church, and we went to this men's event, and there was a young man there who was absolutely on fire for Jesus. And we had a time of worship, and that kid is just praising God, and he's like, man, Jesus is the answer to all my problems. You know, he's really excited. And there was a group of men there, and I still just like, they didn't celebrate his exuberance for God. They weren't excited about his exuberance for God. They were annoyed. Oh, that kid, one of these days, life's going to hit him, and he's going to stop being so excited. It's like, why would I be disappointed that someone was so on fire for God? But they were like kind of jealous, and I'm like, oh, that revealed their brokenness. Their heart was broken. Their heart was hard, and that kid was annoying. Maybe you've been there. I have. I'm not going to lie. This is not an area of completeness for me. This is an area where God is working on me. His heart, the older brother's heart had become hard. Okay. The older brother, oh, yeah. That is none of my grandchildren, by the way. Although I have seen my grandchildren assume that position, but my daughters were always perfect. But we've seen this. Okay, so this is interesting. I want to kind of unpack this a little bit. Is the older brother wanted what the father had, but not the father. Listen to what he says. He reveals his hardened heart and the extent of his brokenness when he says this. But this son of yours, not my brother. I've disowned him, the brother is saying. This son of yours, he's your son. He's nothing to me. He's of no value to me. You get that? Complete, broken. The world's economy views him as worthless. God's economy views him as valuable. This son of yours who has squandered what? Your property. Oh, but wait a minute. The older brother is angry because he wants that property. Your property with prostitutes has come home, and you kill the fatted calf. Your son squandered your wealth, and I'm mad about it. He was not concerned about his brother. He was not concerned about his brother, or his father, I mean. He was concerned about the stuff. He was concerned about the wealth. In fact, like his younger brother did in the beginning, he was sacrificing his relationship with his father over stuff. I'm angry because he squandered, your wealth that I want to be mine. And you're spending more money on him, more resources on him, and I want it for myself. That's what the brother is saying here. So he was sacrificing the relationship to get what he wanted. I was sitting there, I was thinking about this text the other night. My wife and I were doing our usual evening routine of cooking dinner. I'm the sous chef, she's the chef. You know, I don't say, yes, chef, like they do on TV, but I do what she says. Okay. Now, I was thinking about this, and I had this realization about the father. The father didn't care about his stuff. When his younger son asked for it, he said, here, it's not of value to me. The older brother was upset because he didn't value the stuff like the older brother did. You see, because the only valuable thing to the father was his sons. That was the thing that was valuable to him. His sons, not his stuff. And so stuff was just stuff, and his sons were extremely valuable, which I hope you realize that that's how your Father looks at us. That's how our Heavenly Father looks at us. And I'm going to get to that more in just a second. But here's the thing. The source of his hard heart then was this. He believed that he had to earn what was already his, and the Father didn't notice. He wanted the Father to notice, and the Father didn't, at least in the way he wanted it. Because he wanted the Father to hate what he hated, and that was his younger brother. Listen what he says. Look, Father, you're not seeing what's going on. You're not seeing my point of view. Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. I followed the rules, even the ones I've self-imposed on myself and others. Yet you never gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. You never gave me the opportunity to celebrate. I'm jealous that my brother got to go do wild living, and I had to sit here and work, and you never even gave me a goat to celebrate. Listen to what the Father says, though. My son, the Father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. He already owned it, but he didn't think he had earned it. And so he had this perception that the Father was holding out on him. Where have you heard that before, that God is holding out on you? It wasn't on a farm, it was in a garden. And it was between Adam and Eve, right? Satan convinced Eve that God was holding out on her so she should eat the fruit, so then she would experience everything that God had to offer, which God didn't offer sin, but there it was, right? You're holding out on me. You see, the brother was unhappy because he believed that the Father was holding out on him, just like the younger brother thought God was holding out on him. The Father was holding out on him. I'm missing out on all the fun in town, right? However, he had everything he needed to be happy. The Father never told him he couldn't celebrate with his friends. It was his to celebrate with. He could have had a young goat and celebrated and had a meal with his friends. That was a self-imposed rule. In fact, the Father was inviting him to a celebration at that moment. And it wasn't just a young goat. It was the fatted calf. It was beef. It's what's for dinner. The older brother concluded that he was missing out, and he became bitter. He was willing to sacrifice the relationship with his father to harbor his bitterness. This bitterness was preventing him from happiness. And he was truly missing out. I have a bit of an interpretation of this parable. Okay, first of all, you guys probably already understand that this is a parable, meaning that Jesus was telling a story to teach us a lesson, or teach the listener a lesson. So Jesus is telling a story. So there's kind of like, one of the things that you might say, some might say is, the parable is just a shadow of what's really happening, okay? So like, there's things in the parable that represent real things. So, for example, the Father, it's an easy one. The Father represents God, right? Okay, the sons represent who? Us. So there's the Father and us. Okay, And we see the activity now. We see perhaps we can go wayward from the Father and fall into sin, and the Father was waiting for us to come back. We get that one, right? It's like, yes, he invites us back into a relationship. We've broken the relationship. Sin throughout since the garden had separated us from God. Jesus comes, dies on the cross to restore us back, to deal with our sins so that we can exist in a relationship with him. And the only thing left to do is swallow our pride and say, yes, I do need you, God. I've been trying to fix all my problems myself, and they won't fix. And God says, you were never meant to fix it. That's why I'm God, and you're not. But I have a question. I was just like struggling with this week. And okay, what's the celebration represent? What's the celebration represent? This is interesting because, okay, so I came up with two possible things that the celebration represents. The first thing is the Bible talks of a celebration whenever someone comes to Christ or gets saved. There's a celebration, right? Okay, could be that. Or it could be simpler. It could simply be heaven. Because the Son was out of a relationship with the Father, the younger son. The relationship was restored, and now he's in the presence of the Father celebrating. The older brother stands outside and says, I'm not coming in. And the Father comes out and pleads with him. Will you come in, my son? You have been with me all along. Everything I have is yours. Just come in. And because of his hardened heart, the older son walks away from his father. That's a sad commentary, isn't it? That's a tough thing to believe. Because you know what? Here's the thing. The older brother needed to come to his senses as the younger brother did. Both sons needed to realize something. I don't need what my father has. I don't need stuff. I need my Father. So, the older brother's hardened heart actually drew him away from God. I was thinking about this. What is the antithesis to a hardened heart? If I'm struggling, perhaps maybe, and I shared with you guys earlier that I struggle in this way. I'm not perfect. I'm anything but perfect. But what is the antithesis to that? What is the antithesis to the hardened heart? And I was thinking about this. Okay. There was an event that happened where the Pharisees were trying to trip Jesus up. And so they asked him this question, Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? And they were thinking, oh, well, should be, here's this list of 10 commandments, and one of these rules is greater, right? And no. He says it's not that simple. It's not that complex. It's not one of the 10 commandments. It's this. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's the antithesis to the hardened heart. Think about this. Love the Lord your God. God, I love you. And if you love God, you probably love the things he loves, right? And what does he love? God so loved the world that he sent his son, right? So love God with all your heart, with all your soul, all your mind. Here's the beautiful thing about that. When I love God in that way, you know what God does? He pours his love out on me. So it becomes a two-way street, right? So I'm loving God. I'm filled with his love. And then what do? I love my neighbor as myself. Which, isn't that interesting when we put that in terms of value? Oh, if I'm loving my neighbor as myself, I'm valuing my neighbor as an equal in spite of their mistakes, in spite of their brokenness, because I recognize, I have brokenness in my life too. So I'm going to love them as they are and consider them as valuable as myself, because the price that was paid for me was also paid for them. It's not a question of value. It's a question of the heart. It's a question of the heart. Am I open to allowing him to come in and fill me with his love so that I can share his love with the world? Because he's worthy of our worship and worthy of our praise. Let us worship together.